if I may, to Noble.
To Noble.
Good cookie.
This is just a fantastic day. Went with a lot of planning. I have to thank Scott Krutbosch for doing the kind of the coordination of all of this. A small little group of people, Carol Lamont, of course Carolyn. The whole idea of this was Carolyn, I think. But anyway, here we all are, all friends of Noble, celebrating the diversity of my favorite state park. Noble would have gone absolutely loco today with a nice fallout of warblers on Willard's Island. I personally had a whole bunch of beginners, which 90% of them had never seen any of these birds before. So it's especially exciting for me, and it was the type of thing that would have been very exciting for Noble, as he was forever the teacher. And many of you here had him as a professor at Southern. When we first opened, I would get student after student after student of his coming into the shop, and of course with no dough, so you'd kind of give them used binoculars and used books and so forth. But without fail, they would say, this guy was my best teacher I've ever had in my entire scholastic life. And that I heard over and over and over again. He was the best. So when I opened, I knew like less than nothing about birds. And I mean, seriously, and even less about business. So he was thrilled. Wow, a birding store. And at the time, there was just a guy on Cape Cod. And he was like, boy, this is great. What a great idea. And he was just, couldn't have been nicer. And as little as I knew, he never kind of treated me that way. He always looked at me like, great idea, and was very encouraging. And what the big change for me, I started to really get into birding after I got rid of my rock and roll side.
You didn't get rid of your rock and roll
was able to get up in the morning and went kind of crazy on birds. But what really did it for me was my first trip to Costa Rica, which was my first trip to the tropics. And that was with Noble and Charlie Gomez, who came all the way, by the way, from Costa Rica to be here today for this specific reason. Charlie. So then Rafa Campos is here also. Yeah. But he had an easier thing being in Brooklyn. But he's a Costa Rican. Still. Yeah, Tico. So anyway, the way this came about was Noble said, boy, I'd love to have you come to Costa Rica. And I said, I'd love to do that. And I used to talk to Frank Gallo and John Himmelman, and they kind of called themselves trip weasels, and the translation of which was get enough people to go on a trip, you get to go for free. Trip weasel. So, and I've been thinking, like, boy, I would like to go to Costa Rica. And he said, well, yeah, we'll do it. You get the people, and I'll go, and Charlie Gomez will be the guide, and we'll have a ball. Well, I'm trying to get people, and I think I got one person, and it was the lady who made us stop for every tropical kingbird that was ever, in Costa Rica, and Noble got everybody else. So he threw us a bone, and Janet and I went, and we just went crazy. We had so much fun. I think we started in Tortuguero. The thing I remember from there, and you probably remember, where it's the first afternoon, we hear the first howler monkey. Noble jumps off the path, and then all of a sudden he jumps back on the path, pulls down his pants, got bit by a bullet ant. Ow. Yeah, remember this? This is very bad. Very bad. And so for the next 3 days, he was nauseous with diarrhea and looked kind of green. He said, think of a bee stinging you and not stopping for 3 days. And that's what he was experiencing. Yet he kept the humor up and just kept leading the trip. He knew right away that I was very keen and having a ball, so he would go, come here, come on over here, look at this, and I felt like I was getting the real special treatment. And And I was, because he always liked when anybody was really enthusiastic, that's what turned him on. And so I remember one specific time where we were at Chacon's cabins, now called Savegre, on the Savegre River. They used to have students there doing programs at night. So you did a big treat. You'd have dinner, then listen to students. And each student was, at this time, doing a hectare. One was doing birds, one was doing butterflies, one was doing botany, one was doing mycology, which was a real love of Noble's. And so this gal who was going to be going to graduate school did her 10-minute presentation, and Noble just was, you could just see it. He was so excited he couldn't, contain himself. Had to talk to her. He said, I got all the connections. This is where you want to go, and this and that. And, the next day, you'd always try to get up ahead of him. It just never would happen. But I got up before daylight, and sure enough, I saw Noble. I said, oh, yeah, Noble, you sleep okay? He says, no, I couldn't sleep. I was so excited for that girl with the with the mushrooms. And that's how he was. He just loved it, and he just loved when you got into it. And that's what made him, just so good all the way through. And he used to say, when I have the stars, like Frank and Matthew and Joan and Margaret and all these guys that kind of went through his class, that, when he had the people that were really interested, he got really interested. And Bill Ewell, of course, one of his prize students who kept up with the mycology. So anyway, just that's, we could all go on and I want everybody to go on and on. I will not do that anymore, but I just wanted to thank everybody for the great turnout. And I can tell you, Noble is in my mind all the time when I go birding. I did his little big hour thing in Guilford the other day. Didn't look at a bird, just doing it by ear. He used to do 100 in 1 hour in Sachem's Head. I didn't come close. But anyway, thank you very much. And maybe we'll turn it over to Francis Gallo.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yeah, okay.
I was one of Noble's students back when dinosaurs still walked the earth. And Hammonasset was one of the places that kind of got me turned on to birds. We were walking along, and we had walked out Willard's Island, and we were coming around, and back then there weren't quite as many shrubs and trees, and I was walking away from the group, as I was wont to do it many, many times, looking for stuff along the edge, and the group was walking a parallel path with me, and I flushed a bittern, and the bittern landed on the stone wall and went like this. And there's 20 students on one side and me on the other, and Noble's just like it happens every day. And this bittern stood there and never moved. The whole class was, looking at it. Some people were taking pictures. It was great. But that was the kind of, Noble was like a bird magnet. When you walked along, who else walks down Willard's Island and a yellow rail walks out in front of him? Who does that? And it doesn't matter where you were. And Noble, one of my favorite stories about Noble was he would, as a leader, many of you know that one of the hardest problems as a leader is you never ever get to go to the bathroom. Because you can't actually, you try, but every time you step off a trail quietly, you got 15 people coming in behind you, and it's hard. So he was in Peru, and he finally had gotten a chance to kind of sneak off on his own, and they had been looking for white-plumed ant bird? Yeah. And they'd been looking for it and hadn't seen one yet. And of course, Noble goes off to sneak off to use the restroom, and he's sitting there kind of, and one hops up on a branch right in front of him. And you really can't call the group in to see the ant bird. But he got a great look. And I'm not sure that the group actually ever did see it. But that was one of his, he had a lot of those kinds of birds. I spent a lot of time with Noble. I went on his first, when he started 4 Points Nature Tours. I had no money. And Noble said, look, I paid whatever it was that I paid, but it was nowhere near what the trip actually cost, but he wanted me to go. And we were Phil Savoy, who now works for BBC or did, and I and a bunch of other students went on this trip. He wanted us all to go, and we get to the airport, and Phil forgets his passport back in New Haven. So Phil gets in, I don't know what he did, but he got my father to drive, he got my father to drive him to New Haven and drive him back. And in the meantime, I was waiting for him, and there was a screw up, and the group got on the plane, and I'm waiting for Phil, and I turn around, and they're gone. The plane is gone, Phil is late, we get on another flight, but we had left, we didn't know this, we had left our gear with the group. And we go back to the place where the group's gonna go, and there's no gear. We're like, oh great, they must have taken it with us. I get on a plane, we can't get on the same plane. I get on a plane, Phil gets on a plane, we get to Miami. I talk my way through everybody. I get on the plane and I said, look, I need my passport to get, and they go, I need my gear, and they said, your gear's in New York. I said, what do you mean my gear's in New York? So when we left it with the attendant they left all our gear in New York, Phil's and mine. We didn't have it, I didn't have it, my ticket was on it. They were able to get me a duplicate ticket, and I had a birth certificate in my wallet, thank you, Mom. And I got on the plane. And on the next plane, they left. They threw me off. I had gotten on the plane and they threw me off. I got on another plane, I got to Costa Rica, and our gear came later. We got Phil, I don't know, day or two later. Phil showed up at some point, and we all got together and the tour went well. But that was where I learned more about tours and leading tours, that experience. Never leave your ticket, passport with anybody. Never leave leave your friend. Your friend can die. You just get on the plane. I don't know, those are stories that just came to mind. There's got to be more stories. I'm sure I could come up with many, many more. There were lots of great Noble stories. I would get a last one. I would get up. We tried in Costa Rica to beat Noble. I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning. Phil and I were out. We were all excited. We were going to go in and tell Noble we had seen four-eyed possums and all kinds of, we'd seen all this great stuff. And we come around the corner and there's Noble. How you guys doing? Did you see the four-eyed possum? Yeah, thanks, no. And then we would get up early. We'd get up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd go out with this now, and there's Noel. He never went to bed. He never slept on these tours. And he really was, even though he'd done it a million times, he never ever lost his enthusiasm, which is what got us in it. Anyway, next.
And then I came back to school thinking I might as well finish an undergraduate degree, and I took a course from Noble, and it changed the whole course of my life and my interest in academics. I switched to biology. I took every course that Noble ever taught, and I'm sure there are other people here that had that same experience. You took a course from Noble, and that was it. What else is he teaching? I'm going to take that course. So I just want to tell you two really quick stories, very short little vignettes that happened between Noble and I. In 1995, my house blew up, and no one was hurt. But all the people in the birding community that I knew came and brought me food and helped me out. And Noble was right there a couple of days later and asked me if everything was all right, and looking at the ruins of my house. And Noble looked over and he says, "Is that your cat over there?" I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, that is my cat." He said, "Good." I said, "Well, why do you ask?" And he said, "Because he's got the second rarest warbler in Connecticut in his mouth." My cat had killed a worm-eating warbler or something. So one of my last undergraduate courses was a mycology course, and I had no idea that you could go out into the woods and find mushrooms and actually have an academic pursuit finding mushrooms. And so right away I got involved in mycology, and Noble encouraged me so much that I continue to study fungi to this day. And after I graduated from college with an undergraduate degree and I went to graduate school, he kept inviting me back to be sort of a hanger-on in his mycology course for the next few years. So I had that great opportunity of being a graduate assistant with Noble, and that really sent me in that direction. And so although I study all of nature, he really turned me into a mycologist, and I owe him that. And I thank him for that.
Yeah.
I was a Noble student, and when I was in college, I found it very boring. It was like super high school, and I was just about ready to drop out, and I took a field natural history class with Noble, and it had the worst weather for the field trips. Out of the 16 weeks, it had to rain about 12 or 13 of them. It actually snowed in October that year with the leaves on the tree. And he would take us out, but it was the best thing that I ever did in my life. It just totally took a black and white world and made it technicolor. I mean, the things that we saw and the things that he taught us, and the humor and the fun. And it didn't matter that you're in a poncho at the end of a long line. In fact, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because he picked up a British soldier lichen in a rainstorm one time, and it got passed down the path that was very narrow, and I was at the very last one. So I got to hold it in my hand, and they're all get nice and swollen with a little red, fruiting structure on top. And I just looked at this and I said, wow, how could I never have seen one of these before? And what is this? And I just got so enthusiastic about lichens. I went back to his office, and where can I learn more about them? And in those days they had a horrible old key by Mason E. Hale. And Noble says, well, if you're interested, I have a half an hour this day, and he wrote me out a schedule, and I have a half an hour next week, and we can figure out how to key them out. So he had a herbarium specimens that were labeled at the college, and so we keyed backwards. And I really, really, really got so hooked on lichens. I still do this today. I've taught workshops on it. Noble actually, he was down the supply pond. Noble lived in Branford, and I lived in Branford, but he's always hanging around the supply pond. And we both took turns putting bird feeders and suets up and on the trees there. And so, especially Fridays, twice a month when our housekeepers came, we got out of the house early to go for breakfast, we'd hang out and see Noble and Dan Sonati down there. And so it was one of the times I said to him, Noble, now that I've got permission finally to put lichens and mosses into the Connecticut Botanical Society herbarium, if you see anything interesting, I said, pick it up and, I'll add it. Well, he shows up one day with 300 at my house. And I think I stopped him at 1,000. And I'm still working on them. And this has been like 6 years, and I think I've keyed now 550 or so. And it's not just the keying, but making the little packets and putting them in the herbarium. But that's how Noble was. And he just, I don't know, everything in your life, he just, even after you left school, he would just keep in touch in little ways. I mean, not just little things like Christmas cards with a gamma grass on it. I mean, how many people send out gamma grasses for Christmas, red and green? But these were the kinds of things that, you always had something coming from Noble. But the other thing that he did a lot, and I've got tons of these tucked away at places, little maps, Carol, you find these in your mailbox, and little notes and sometimes treasure maps. Oh, you can find this lichen that's in the water on a rock right up here by White Flower Farms, and he tells you how to get to it. I mean, these are the kind of things. This is how he was. I mean, it's not. I mean, I'm talking, I graduated in 75. This is a long time later. You're still getting treasure maps on lichens and this sort of thing. And that's how he was, or a great fern or something. And you can never one-up Noble. I remember telling, hey, Noble, I saw such and such, and pileated woodpecker, and I think it's nesting over here. 2 days later, you get a little thing with 12 years of data of how many birds it had in its nest. You could never one-up Noble. He just knew everything. And Frank was right. He was a bird magnet. You were out with Noble, birds came from nowhere. We're standing there one winter day down in the supply pond. He's sitting there. I don't even know if, Dan, you were in the car with him. But we're standing there talking to him through the window. He's sitting in the car. And Noble goes, don't move, watch this. And we're like, with Noble, something's going to happen. All of a sudden, from across the supply pond, a red-tailed hawk comes and flies this far in front of his car and grabs a little chickadee. I mean, it was just, we were all, it was always something. You were with him, and he was so always into something new. In classes, he would hunt you down at times, knew where you were. And I remember walking out of walking down the hall, going to another class one time, and he's got a pillowcase, and I'm going, uh-oh. And I said, it's moving. And so he goes, Carol, come here, I got to show you this. And he goes over and he reaches in and he's pulling out a snake. And I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. I'm scared to death of snakes. I was told to freeze when you saw a snake. He pulls a snake out and I go, oh, that can't be a copperhead. And it's, of course, a hognose. And then another time he hands me a turtle in the hall, and it's pissing all over me. And I'm standing there, people are walking by. Carol, look at this. He hands me this turtle, and the turtle starts pissing all over the floor. Oh, nice, Noble. He was so funny and so great. And he would take bunches of us out on, field trips and never turn the heater on the car because you couldn't get too warm, But, great days, great fun. I mean, he was the best.
Here and kept hearing these stories about this mythical creature that's like roaming the woods of Connecticut, or this Noble Proctor person that's out there who knows everything. It's just incredible. And I never actually ran into him until, I don't even know when it was, but I remember, full disclosure, I'm a herpetologist. I really like frogs and snakes, so I bird in my spare time, but I try to hide it. And I don't chase birds. And I lived in Torrington, and a harlequin duck shows up in the Farmington River. So it was that close, I couldn't pass it up. It's a harlequin duck, I have to go see it. So I'm standing in the cemetery in Farmington, and there's only one other person around, and he's wearing binoculars around his neck. So I thought, we got a bun in some shape or form. And we looked at the harlequin duck for maybe 30 seconds, and then spent the next 3 hours just talking about everything in the world, Costa Rican frogs and bugs and everything. And we were buddies right from the get-go. Only to find out later, when we really decided that we really need to get going and go back to our normal lives, that we actually forgot to introduce one another, and I found out that was Noble right there. So, so there he was. So yeah, it's been wonderful just to get to know him. One of the highlights really for me personally was to have Noble come out to the Roger Tory Peterson Institute in Jamestown a few years ago, where I live right now, where I'm the director. Where Noble was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award, the Roger Tory Peterson Award, awarded by Jeff Gordon from the American Birding Association, and which was wonderful, well-deserved. Couldn't think of a better person to get it. Couldn't think of a better person to uphold the name of Roger Tory Peterson and the reputation of Roger Tory Peterson. It's really just, it's just an extension. It just keeps passing from generation to generation. And we had some great field trips. Several of us were here. I think one of my highlights was that we were done looking at cerulean warblers, and then we decided to go look for salamanders, because what else are you going to do? The bus was just going to turn around while we just kept ourselves busy for a little while looking for things that nobody was interested in. And what was it, 45 minutes later, we realized the bus still hadn't come back, and we thought that they'd forgotten about us, so we just started walking back to town, and eventually they found us again. And but we had a jolly old time. It was fantastic, just fantastic day. And I have to say, and this is kind of pains me to say too, is that I did find out one animal that I had seen that he had not seen yet, a hellbender. And we had made standing plans to go and see one as soon as possible, and it unfortunately never came to that point. But I think that sort of segues into what I was hoping to really get across here too, is that we're continuing this work, and you all know that we've also asked for donations in honor of Noble to support programs that bring young people out into nature and keep his teaching legacy going. We've been working with the people from Audubon, Connecticut. Corey's here, just saw Patrick walk in here somewhere too. Scott, obviously. People who've been working to get young people who otherwise would never be exposed to nature to come outside. And I'm really excited to actually have 2 stellar wildlife guards right here. So if you haven't met them yet, you got to come say hi to them. They're great, great, great people. So I just thank you all for coming here. I thank you all for honoring Noble, because I couldn't think of a better way to do this. And what a beautiful day to do it too. And thank you for supporting the program, supporting these young people to have a chance to find mentors like all of us. Now it's our job now to keep Noble's job going, right? So
I was fortunate. I got a jump start on probably a lot of you. I met Noble in 1965 when he, and for those of you who are senior members in the audience here may remember Jim Lane, were in the Boston area because the National Audubon Society was having their annual convention in Boston that year. And they had a field trip to Newburyport, Plum Island, and I was birding on my own the day that they were doing that, and Noble, of course, in his inimitable way, and Jim Lane were in a car by themselves. They were not on the bus with the National Audubon hoi polloi. So it happened that I knew my way around Newburyport and Plum Island better than Noble did in those days. So I was able to show them 2 or 3 things that they hadn't seen and wanted to see. And we had such a grand time. They said, well, why don't you come into Boston tomorrow night, and we'll introduce you to some people and so forth. That was my first encounter with Roger Peterson and a number of other luminaries that were at that meeting. So Jim Lane had never seen a Corey shearwater, and he was going to be with Noble for a week or 2. And I said, well, I tell you, I think maybe we can grab one for you on the Block Island Ferry the next weekend. So I went down to Point Judith, and we did a run out to Block Island, and Jim got to see his Corey shearwater and so forth. So that was great. In any case, that was the beginning of what turned out to be a lifelong friendship. And we had a number of adventures through the years that I will not try to go into, but I'll just give you 2 or 3 sort of quick sort of milestones that were interesting. The first of which was in 1965, in the winter of that same year that I met Noble in the fall. He had come up. We were birding on Cape Ann. There were 4 of us. And we were at Andrews Point in Rockport, which some of you know is certainly one of the colder places in the planet. No place to hide. And we're down on the rocks looking at black guillemots or purple sandpipers or something. And all of a sudden, one of the guys spots a wren up on these big jumbled granite rocks that are part of that promontory, if you know it. And of course, we all said, a wren? This is, I think it was December 19th or whatever. So we finally get on this wren, and the thing disappears over the rocks. And all of a sudden, it jumps up on the rocks, and it starts doing push-ups. And Noble says, rock wren! Rock wren? Yeah, right. I'm trying to think in my mind, where is a rock wren? What does it look like? He says, see, it's doing push-ups. Well, that was the first state record for Massachusetts for rock wren. So needless to say, that was very exciting. That bird stayed around until January. So that was a biggie. In any case, it was the next year in 1966 that, similar to what you were saying about your educational career, mine was similarly checkered on the front end. In any case, at that point, I was, shall we say, between full-time enrollment, matriculation, and I was taking a couple of night courses at BU. And Noble approached me about the possibility. He said, look, you've read North with the Spring. You were a big Edwin Way Teal fan. I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, well, I've got this plan. How about if we do a 2-month trip? We leave from Massachusetts and we go south into the spring and turn around and come back about the time that spring arrives in New England. I said, grand idea. Dropped the courses I was taking. Noble had a green Volkswagen Bug at the time, which we took this back seat out of. We outfitted it with field guides and nets and cameras and binoculars and scopes and just about everything that would fit. A couple of these old military pup tents that were nothing more than really an olive piece of canvas that looked like this. And we set forth, and we had the most marvelous trip. But on that trip, speaking of the bird whisperer and so forth, probably one of the highlights, arguably, of either of our careers was getting to see a Bachman's warbler in South Carolina in early May of that year. And I won't go into the details, but suffice to say, that was a pretty important signature point in my time with Noble, and that was on the early end. In 1969, Noble served as the best man in my wedding. Noble had never been in a wedding at that point. He, again, in his inimitable way, he obtained a book on the duties of what a best man is supposed to do. And I think he probably practically memorized the book. And yeah, I mean, the whole 9 yards, he had it down. And my wife was of Lebanese extraction, and we were married in a Syrian Orthodox church, which if you've ever seen a Syrian Orthodox wedding service, it's lengthy, it's complicated, it involves crowns, it involves marathon trips. So during the course of the ceremony, you have to make 3 trips around this altar type thing. This was my wife's plan. I was merely a spectator. In any case, we had gone through the rehearsal and we knew what we were supposed to do, but actually during the service, after we'd gone around the table twice, to picture this, Noble is, we're within earshot, and nobody in the congregation, of course, is aware. He said, "That's 2 laps, 1 more to go." So that was, somebody's lunch is going to go, I think, or somebody's microscope is going to get carried away. Okay. Anyway, so those were some of the early years, and then through the years subsequent to that, there have been many, many adventures and encounters and so forth. But I think to underscore everything that everybody has said and undoubtedly feels and thinks, he was truly remarkable. He is unequivocally, in my mind, and I've had the opportunity to know a lot of really fine naturalists and birders and things, he headed the list by light years. I mean, he was just an extraordinary person, and certainly his enthusiasm and his sense of humor, which everybody has already sort of touched on, and his ability to ignite interest in people who may not even have been interested, or they didn't think they were interested, was legend. So we've lost one of the great ones with Noble. But this was really nice. I appreciate Carolyn and everybody else who made the effort to pull this together, because I've been waiting for a year for this. And it turned out that I told Jerry Conley that I didn't think I was going to be able to come, because our Mass Audubon Birdathon is today, which is a huge event. But I did what I had to do beforehand in terms of my fundraising, so I said, I'm going. There's no way I can blow this off. So anyway, thank you.
Well, I don't have anything quite so colorful to say, probably, but I had been birding for quite a few years, and then I took Noble's 2 courses, ornithology courses, and really loved them. I especially remember his drawing a leaf on the board and a fragment of a warbler tail sticking out from behind it and saying, "This is what you'll probably see of a warbler." And I remember being so impressed on a field trip that he saw a robin and he said, "Look," this chokes me up, "look at that robin, isn't that beautiful?" So that it wasn't just being a lister or finding the rarest possible thing. I would love to have seen a Bachman's warbler, but the fact that he did appreciate the common stuff so much, and that gives you a chance to share that enthusiasm and then share that with other people, that those are the things they're going to see. Okay? I got a chance because the science director in the Hamden Public Schools, after years of my PTA activism, knew I was a birder. And he said to me, "How would you like to go outdoors with 4 teachers, elementary school teachers and their classes, and get some bird observation into their programming?" And my first thought was, I never worked with anything but college students. But then I thought, well, I had little kids, okay? So I made a data sheet, because you got to write things down if it's science. And I wrote a thing for myself called Why Birds, which is how come it was legit to use this for a science program. And it got started and it really took off. But the thing that was so great was that Noble, and I'm sure everybody else, from what you said and from what I cannot imagine would not be true, that if he ever had contact with you, you could talk to him through the years about things that you needed help with or wanted to know. And the reason I brought my Killdeer model up here is that he got me permission to use Roger Torrey Peterson drawings to try to make life-size coloring pictures for kids out of, because with little kids, the sparrow and the eagle are the same size in the field guide. And so we had these, which get used in many ways and which I share with teachers all over the place.
I still use them.
Yeah, well, without him, this would never have been possible, because having taught college English, I was into not plagiarizing, okay? So anyway, there are a lot of other things that I could say, but I won't. But I would like to read something from someone who would have loved to be here but couldn't. And that is Allison Oliveri, who was on the first trip to Costa Rica I went on. Not the one where I shot the video, but the first one. Because when I wrote to ask her if she was coming and would she like the DVD, she wrote this, which I think really says what we're all doing. She says, "I feel that I am a Noble Proctor ripple effect provider now, and that this will be my life's work until I keel over." So I just thought it's nice to have Allison with us with that quote, which expresses what so many of us have been trying to do.
Well, I didn't prepare anything, and I didn't think I was going to have to talk, but I have the honor to do a lot of trips with Noble, and everybody talk about the fun, which was wonderful, the luck. I do remember when you mentioned that when they go to the bathroom one time, we were Judy there, and he has to go to the bathroom, and we were waiting, and we were looking for silvery-throated jays. Oh, yeah. And we were there, and Noble said, "I have to go, to wait for me here." Suddenly we start hearing him calling like crazy, and we get there, and there's Noble. "Look that way!" And there were the silvery-throated jays. And there was always things like that. It was great, and I have fun, and I learned so much of him about everything. But the best part of I think it was to learn about. In his trip, it was fun. It was nice, and we have incredible experiences time. But also, he was so kind. Somebody mentioned that when he come home every year, he returned. He bring all this presents for my kids. It was like Christmas. And even when he started getting sick, he disappeared. We continue in contact. And where's Eric? And Eric brought him 3 years ago to Costa Rica. Come. 2 years ago, it's going to be this year, no?
Yeah, 3 years.
Yeah, and thanks to him, we have a chance to do a trip. Noble, my driver, which is a good friend, and Eric, and that was great.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, buddy. Thank you. Appreciate it. Absolutely. It was a great time.
And then, it's hard to say, but last year I talked with Noble, and it was so wonderful to hear him and say bye. And I appreciate all of you here, and Judy, that gave me a chance to come, my friend Rafa too. And we've been lucky and blessed to meet Noble. Thank you.
One thing that I remember about Noble is Noble, and Flo alluded to it, never made you feel stupid. He was always just the consummate teacher. And I remember I had just started birding, I'd taken his first class, and I was at Milford Point, and I had seen 150 Western sandpipers. And I knew it, and I was excited, and I had to run to a payphone. I remember running up the street to a payphone and calling Noble. I said, "Noble, I'm at Milford Point. I have 150 Western sandpipers." And he says, "That's incredible. That's great, Frank. Why don't you check Dunlin?" And I said, "Hold on." I left the phone and I ran back down the street. I ran out to the beach. And I ran back up the street. Yeah, that's it. But he never made me feel bad. And we were at Lighthouse Point, and Noble had his old brown Nova. You remember that? And Ed Shove and I are there. We used to get there early to do the hawk watch. We are looking at a bird that is a micro speck on the horizon. And we're trying to figure out if it's an eagle. It's in a glide. We can't tell if it's an eagle or an osprey, and we're looking at it and looking at it. And Noble drives up in his Nova. He rolls down the window, he sticks his head out, and he goes, "Oh, look, you got an eagle." But this is the story I wanted to tell, and this is as much for Fred, and I don't know if he remembers this. But I got my first job because of Noble, and he said, you need to go. My friend Fred Sibley and Jeff Spendelow, a grad student at Yale, are going to start the Faulkner Island Term Project, and you should go see him. And I said, okay. So he sent me down to Stony Creek, and I pull into the Stony Creek field station, and there's this man, Fred Sibley, who is up to his shoulder in a vat of formaldehyde fishing out whale parts. And he pulls his arm out, and he kind of gets a rag, and he rubs it off, and hi, I'm Fred Sibley. I'm like, hi, how are you? You know, and he goes, do you know how to use a Boston whaler? Yeah, I guess. He said, okay, here's what I want you to do. He says, here's the Boston whaler. Jeff is out on the island. You go out here, and you're going to come to a red marker buoy. You're going to turn the boat. You go 270 degrees, and you're going to go for 5 miles, and Jeff is waiting for you on the island. I said, okay. And I get to the boat, I'm like, and I get out to the marker buoy, and I turn, and the fog hits. And I can't see the front of the boat. And I'm like, and a miracle of miracles, out of the fog materializes an island. I'm like, oh, thank you, God. and I pull in, and I sort of put into this little bay, and I pull in, and this guy comes running down, and he goes, hi, I'm Jeff Spendelow, nice to meet you. I climb up. He's like, look, I just got a radio call from my wife. My daughter's in the hospital. I have to go. Make yourself comfortable. I'll be back as soon as I can. And off he goes. And he didn't come back for 3 days. And I was alone on this island. I was 19. And I'm like sitting on this island. I'm like, So I go up, and this nor'easter hits. And it is just like blowing a gale. And I get, and like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I get this Faulkner's Island, this is Stony Creek Field Station. Can you read me? Yeah, hello? Yeah, listen, Frank, this is Jeff. My daughter's, I got to stay in the hospital. I can't get out there tonight. I'll try and come out tomorrow. Make yourself comfortable. Sorry, over. I'll call tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Yeah. Gone. And so I sat out there, and I was so bored after like the second day that I'm like reading the journals, and I'm looking, he's doing a nest check, and I'm like, oh, I could do this. And I finished sorting the cards, and I'm like, oh, he's painting sticks. I painted a bunch of sticks, and I did all this stuff because I was there for 3 days. And he comes back 3 days later, and he walks in, and he's like, did you do all this? I said, no, the tooth fairy did it. It's like, yeah, I did that. She goes, want a job? And I worked for Jeff and Fred for like 5 summers, and it was the best thing that ever happened. And it was all because of Noble. And he knew it. He just had a push. So.
Thank you so much for sharing your spirit. All of you have a spirit that has been infused by Noble, and you have infused him. And though I don't know all of you all that well, I know many of your names and maybe voices on the phone. But it couldn't have been a better life partner. And I'm so happy that to have shared his passion with so many of you. And I just am so filled with thanksgiving for all of you and for the sharing that you've been able to put together today and feeling Noble in all of this. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your support for the Peterson Institute. And anybody, a plug, I've heard people say the coffee is great. You can get it at the Audubon shop in Madison.
always something to see. That's the great part of it. And of course, it's like fishing. Not going to see anything unless you get out there and really take a look. Persistence is the key. Don't give up. Don't do it fast and walk away from it. Go in, spend time, and look. Oh, hear that high pitch. Meow, meow. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. That's moving through. Boo, boo. What it's doing is it's probably stopping. They also will feed on grapes, and there's plenty of grapes. They'll feed on cedar. There's plenty of that. And then they'll stop and, of course, drill holes. Come back later and visit for sap. But there's not a whole lot of good sap trees here. There are a few apple trees in the area that they'll stop and feed at. More kinglets, more yellow rumps, more palms. This whole coastal area, the reason why it's so important, and a lot of people talk about it, is there is sort of a continuum of salt marshes and this scrub habitat running down the coast, but because it's such a nice habitat, there's been a lot of building and destruction and inroading into it. We can look around here, and there are marinas over there, and there are houses right out on the marsh, and all of that, of course, disrupts this habitat. And the habitat's so important for these migrants. It's necessary to have that. So if you were to go down the coast, you look at Hammonasset here, and then the next jump would be down into the marshes of Guilford, and then you would have to make a jump, and you would get down into the coastal, that little fine coastal strip of New Haven. And we know so many things come through Lighthouse Park and then shift on over, and they're on the into that little coastal strip, because a lot of them want to use that habitat to hide in, because as hawks are migrating, if the birds are moving, they want a place to hide, so they circle around New Haven Harbor. And then you go down, and next you would hit West Haven Coast, and then you have to jump again to Milford. So in a very short stretch of 20-25 miles, you've got just little pockets of salt marsh habitat, plants to provide this food supply, shelter from hawks that occur along the coast. And so we want to save as much of that as indeed possible. We tend to evaluate everything in man's lifetime, which is a very short span of time when you look at nature in general. Some 60 years, 80 years, some changes, but ebbs and flows will always be with us. And it's obvious when you come out and you bird for 50, 60 years, you're going to see a lot of changes come about. So some have dropped, others have increased. That's the ebb and flow of life. Slow migration is so great. Always something to see. Always something on the move. Oh, it's beautiful.